Thank you very much for the invitation to take part in this event. I have listened to all the presentations with great interest, and they very often raised the issue of assessment of medical technologies, and I would like to dwell on this issue in more detail. Where medical technologies are now being assessed. First, it is clinical recommendations. We assess the clinical results. We do not discuss economics. We speak about the results of clinical trials, and then we assign the level of evidence. Also, we have the Institute of Clinical Approbation that is responsible for this assessment jointly with the clinical trials. They collect information on costs, and then they look at the expediency of investing in this technology. Of course, it is an overall assessment in accordance with the federal law number 61. And recently, we have developed the circle of kindness, and we make an examination with the elements of healthcare assessment. So today, the assessment of technologies is made in respect of drugs, but very frequently we have to assess medical makes. We use real-world data in the process of assessment for a long time because there is no other way to do it. In order to assess the cost effectiveness, we need to model what will be the costs and what will be the outcomes in the course of the patient. We cannot get all the data that are required for modeling only from randomized clinical trials. And so, of course, the real-world data have been always used. What is the cause of the disease? What is the root of the patient? The incidence of the disease. So all these data are required to fill in this model. We take this data from registers if there are relevant registers. We take statistical reports, data of observational studies. So all this data have been used by pharmacoeconomists, but I would like to stress that these are not data about comparative efficacy of technologies. What happened in the last years? So it was mentioned in the morning that the products, the drugs have changed considerably. We have very many drugs for orphan diseases, and we have now we divide large diseases into small subgroups, and we have received the tumor agnostic drugs, cellular drugs, orphan drugs. So all these drugs are not mass market. They are oriented at a very narrow categories of patients, and all of them are costly. The medical requirements in these drugs are not satisfied, and usually they are registered in accordance with the fast-track way. We have limited data on the efficacy of these drugs because randomization is impossible in trials. It's impossible to find the control group. And if we speak about therapy, we cannot define the duration of the effect. So the assessment has a lot of uncertainty because we never know in the end whether we should finance this technology or not. If we look at the experience of our foreign colleagues, we may say that everything started with orphan drugs. Some agencies allowed to provide data of real-world data for these orphan drugs. And recently we saw that in foreign countries, the agencies of assessment have become very active in respect of real-world data. For example, EQUIG began work on RWD to be collected on CAR-T therapies. Then you see CAT agency in France. They also announced expansion to its scientific advice program to include advice on RWE generation. And the Canadian agency has have also specified this matter. What are the basic recommendations on foreign agencies? Probably the most complete information is contained in the NICE recommendation that was published has been published this year, and they provide very specific information. They focus on the transparency of reporting, on the reproducibility of trials, and on the assessment of suitability of this data. CAT met the requirements of the manufacturers and introduced scientific counseling in order to orient the company as to how they are supposed to collect and present this data collected. Germany is most conservative here. GBA may ask for the data of real-world data on orphan drugs and on conditionally registered drugs. Sorry. You see the trial which was published in The Economist. They decided to see how regulators use the data provided by pharma companies. They decided to study the file of the assessment for 5 drugs. 3 participated in the fast track, and 2 drugs that are technological, high-tech drugs. Here you see these 5 agencies from Australia, Canada, France, Germany, and England. And you see, there were 35 reports, and in 21 of these reports, the company presented real-world data, real-world evidence. So the most advanced in the use of RWE are England and Canada. They have more active assessments in this respect. Germany is more conservative. In 17 out of 21 reports, real-world evidence was used to assess efficacy of technology of comparison. The problem in the product was that there was no control group and there was no information about comparison. What are the barriers for the use of real-world data in assessment? The first barrier that has been mentioned several times is the absence of regulatory, legal regulation. Only NICE described the legal regulation points. Other agencies have these requirements, but they are very blurred, very unclear. So below you see the data from the trial of the economist. What terms are used? First of all, the authors believe that there should be a glossary so that all the agencies and companies would understand equally what we understand by this or that trial. And an early dialogue with the manufacturer is very important in order to assess how suitable the population is. Because there were cases when data were provided to NICE, but the regulator could not accept this data because the population was not suitable. And also there are no clear recommendations on the presentation and collection of data. And assessment agencies do not always provide this information. As to our system, I must say that we used this data, but now we understand that we need new sources of real-world data, and the circle of kindness can become really a very good help here. They finance often drugs, and we cannot refuse this data. These drugs are so expensive that administration and collection of this data will pay off. That's why we need to monitor, to collect this data and to produce, make a reassessment of these drugs and introduce them into our standard system of reimbursement. And the drugs from the circle of kindness will be go to the list of essential drugs. Risk sharing is also an important procedure, but here we say again that sometimes the assessment agency cannot make a decision whether they will finance or not. The drug works, the company gets the money. If it doesn't, the company returns the money or provides additional packs. And this mechanism is a very good source of collecting data of clinical practice. Many drugs in Italy, for example, I financed through risk sharing. So they kill one bird, two birds in one arrow. Patients get an early access, but the government removes the risk of unnecessary costs. Also, we have mechanisms of faster track registration. And this is also a source of data collection. And we need to connect these two processes with the risk sharing. If we have conditional registration, we must have a risk sharing. How can I sum it up? So we have limited data about the comparative effectiveness on innovational technologies, and we have to collect the data and to use them for making decision about funding. We do not have any other ways. And for the effective use of real-world data, it is necessary to develop standards for the collection, analysis, assessment of quality, and use of RWD. And the effective financing of innovational expensive technologies is impossible without introducing risk sharing. We need to collect this data and define the level of funding depending on what result we have received.